Wow, it's amazing how a scene is brought together. It's a lot of work and it involves many people. And these stacks of drawings represent a short sequence of about a minute and 50 seconds worth of full feature animation in both rough and cleanup. That's a lot of drawings. Now let's sidestep for a moment and talk about something that's part of that process, which every animator needs to know, and that is how to follow timing charts and create proper in-betweens. Many animators actually start their career as an in-betweener or an assistant to an animator doing that very thing. But even so, you have to learn how to in-between your own work because number one, that is part of the animating process, and number two, in most studios, they won't have an assistant for you, in which case you'll have to do it yourself. It's one thing to learn the posing and creative side of animating, but if you don't know how to finish it with proper in-betweens, then your scene in the end could turn out lousy. To start off with, I first want to explain the two main approaches to animating a scene. The first one is a method called straight ahead, and the second is called pose to pose. In the straight ahead approach, the animator draws the first drawing and literally works very loosely straight ahead from that point on, allowing the animator to be spontaneous, doing one drawing on top of the other, until you come to the end of the scene. And you don't look back or stop to necessarily pre-plan any specific action. Now this approach is meant to be highly improvisational and creative, thinking of new ideas as you go along in both drawing and action. The downside to this approach is that it's very hard to follow up on or tie down the scene after the dust is cleared, and it often creates a lot of technical issues to be resolved later. Most wild actions like scrambling or flurries, for example, are more effective with straight ahead animation. Now pose to pose, on the other hand, is a much more structured method and so much easier for an assistant to follow up on. Here the animator exercises greater control over the movement by planning out each pose carefully. In this approach, the animator comes up with the main storytelling poses from the beginning, making sure that the overall acting points of the scene are hit. And once those are relating and working well together, then subsidiary poses are created to further define each movement within those major poses. On each of those poses, there is a timing chart created so that from that point on, an assistant can take over the scene and by following those timing charts can draw the necessary in-betweens to finish it up. One approach is not necessarily better than the other because each one offers certain advantages. And to quote The Illusion of Life, with pose to pose, there is clarity and strength. In straight ahead, there is spontaneity. And that pretty much sums it up. Personally, I approach most of my scenes with a certain combination of both together. For example, I might start a scene creating the main poses that show the story points in the scene, and I do that so that I know generally where I'm going. But then I use straight ahead animation to animate between or through them or to get a certain gesture or movement right to create more fluidity or get the creativity I want within those poses. And I might not even use those first poses, or I might modify them a little bit by the time that I'm finished. With that brief explanation of how an animator approaches a scene, we can now better talk about how to follow timing charts and how to create the necessary in-betweens.